It's the Eagle Community Television Forum with your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Shorman, and this is the Forum on Eagle Community Television. It's good to have you watching along because our forum is brought to you by Hayes Med. The important part here, though, we have an election coming up, and one of those people that's jumped in from the outside, not a typical politician, jumped in to run is Dr. Roger Marshall. He's from Great Bend, and we have him on the program today. Good to have you here.
Gary, it's great to be here.
Good to have you a part of this program. And one of the things I want to talk about is what got you excited about getting into politics. Yeah. Typically, you deliver babies. Now you're out, I'd say, kissing babies on the campaign trail.
Kissing every baby we can find. You know, Gary, my grandson was born about a year and a half ago, our first child. And it's one of those moments. Do you have a grandchild yet?
I do, and they're just great.
They're as good as advertised. But I think it's a moment when in your life you sit there and say, where are we going? Where have we been? And one of the conversations my wife and I had was that we're not leaving it better for him than it was given to us. He was born with $40,000 of national debt. And my wife looked at me and said, my gosh, people have been asking you to run for Congress for several years now. I think you need to go do this.
Well, one of the things, Dr. Marshall, is that one of the things that you look at, running for office is not an easy feat to do. What was the process to actually say, I'm going to do it, and now get started to do it?
Yeah. We spent about 3 months getting ideas, formulating, getting a consultant lined up, those types of things. And after we did that, we kind of hit the ground running just a bit over a year ago. And the first thing I did was write 100 of my closest friends and said, will you help us do that? And start growing that grassroots right then. And then, since then, that's all we've been doing is we've traveled 25,000 miles. We've been in 80-some communities, growing that grassroots, people shaking hands, pressing face whenever we can.
You mentioned, the several years people have asked you to do this. What's the need in Kansas that you see that's not being addressed?
Well, the biggest issue people tell me on the campaign trail is they'd like to have a voice back on the House Ag Committee, and that we can't gamble that with the future of our children. They just feel like we have no voice at all in Congress on the House side from this district.
You've had some endorsements from some of the ag side as well.
Yeah, some super endorsements. The Kansas Livestock Association has endorsed us. The corn growers, ethanol people, a lot of people helping us sorghum. Something more recently.
I know you've had several groups that have been involved doing that.
The Dairy Farmers of America was a big endorsement, a recent endorsement as well.
So why does somebody, say the dairy farmers, why do they endorse an obstetrician from Great Bend? Because you deliver babies. How does that fit in?
Right. So actually I grew up with a big ag background, was the 5th generation farmer, really grew up on the backside of a tractor hauling hay. Turned 16, I got to work at the cell barn every weekend for almost 3 years, and I'm really heavily invested spiritually in agriculture now. We're feeding cattle, we have land that we have cow-calf operations, so certainly I understand agriculture, and again, they felt like we have a current congressman who's working against Kansas agriculture, and they think with my agriculture background that I'll be able to go to Washington and help solve problems.
I do see that as, one of the things in the medical side of it. Obviously, things like Obamacare come to mind as one of the things that I know Kansans really struggle with. That's part of it. But when you look at those things important between the oil industry and the gas industry, and then the ag industry, those are the most important things that we can develop in Kansas.
Absolutely. So 50% of our economy is still agriculture. Another big chunk of it is military and healthcare. I've had military experience, I have healthcare experience. There's really not a job in this big 1st district I haven't done.
What is your next step when you talk about doing this in the campaign? Because I know just recently you signed up and actually applied to run, right, and to make that happen. Have you been surprised about the whole process of running for office?
Yes, I have been. From the very start of this, the first thing we had to do was do an FEC report. And literally it took our accountants hundreds of hours to fill out that report. It was worse than your federal income tax, if you can imagine. It's something I could not have ever filled out on my own. I had to have professional help to do that. And then beyond that, every year we have to redo it, so we're in the process now of doing another financial report. And if you could just imagine tracking down every investment you have, and your kids' investments and your wife's investments, and then we have to do it for this quarter as well, so it's a constant barrage of paperwork.
Is that a detriment to a lot of people trying to get into political office, but not only because of the complexity there, because I know there's been a couple issues that have come up where you've missed a couple of things, and I think, is that just the complexity of the issue or the complexity of the process that causes that?
I think so. I think it's the complexity, much like I can't do my own income tax anymore. I'm not sure if you're still doing yours, but I think it's just gotten, everything is so complex when the government's involved that no one can complete it properly.
You are traveling around the 1st District. There's a lot of miles in the 1st District. You mentioned 85,000, I think, if I remember right.
25,000 miles we've traveled in the past year. We've been in almost 85 communities. I think we're at 83 or 84 different communities now.
Been through there. What have you learned?
I think first and foremost, people want to talk about the Ag Committee, and we address that. And then beyond that, what they want to talk about are national security, the economy, and lastly is healthcare. So I was a little surprised. Of course, healthcare is important to me, but even nationally, healthcare is the #3 concern people have. A sixth of people's incomes or the budget for your corporation is going towards healthcare, and it looks like those are skyrocketing. So people want to talk about healthcare, they want to talk about the economy and jobs, and they want to talk about national security.
So when you divide those down, let's talk about healthcare first. Obviously, Obamacare. You've been engaged in work at a hospital. You've seen the results of that. What do you plan to do with Obamacare? What would you like to do?
Well, the first thing we have to do is repeal it. I've tried to figure it out, and I cannot figure it out. Talk about the most complex piece of legislation ever written, over 200,000 pages. So the first thing we have to do is repeal it. But then we have to know what to replace it with. And I think that's where I'm going to be a big help. I actually have great concepts on what to replace it with. I think we have to replace it with some real simple incremental approaches. We don't have to eat the whole apple at one time. We can take a bite of it at a time. Simple things like letting health insurance be bid across state lines. Portability of insurance, letting you take your health insurance with you. We can work on tort reform. About 10% of a hospital's budget or a physician's budget is paying their malpractice premium. And Kansas has great tort reform issues. So I think that we can take some simple steps like that to start lowering the cost. We could talk about pharmacies, and pharmacy supplies have went way up the past 2 years. And we could talk about that for the next half hour. So those are some simple steps.
One of the things I know you get back to Washington, you'll deal with the national issues as well and try to combine those with issues that we see here in Kansas. National security is one of those. Kansas is a big right to own your own gun state. Do you hear about that when you're on the campaign trail?
Absolutely, I do. And I'm going to start by saying I'm a lifetime member of the NRA and was just raised with guns. And my dad was a police officer, like I mentioned. So we just grew up around guns. And then certainly I believe in the right to bear arms. And that's part of the national security issue. It certainly scares me, the situation that happened in Paris. When you're in an enclosed situation, the bad guys have all the guns and the good guys don't have access to any.
You have a race on your hand because you have an incumbent, Representative Tim Huelskamp. What are the differences between you and him?
Well, of course, Tim is a 20-year professional politician. I'm a physician. I'm a community person. My wife and I are very involved in our church and our community. And what I've learned is how to work with other people. What I've learned is to be able to bring people together, to talk about the problems, to put our differences aside and come up with solutions together. I think the Affordable Care Act is a great example. Anyone can sit here and say repeal it, but let's work together to what we're going to replace it with. So I think the biggest difference is that I'm a peacemaker. Since I've been 10 years old, my brother has called me Henry Kissinger. The talent that God has given me is the ability to be a peacemaker and bring people together to solve community problems.
One of the things you hear when you're out is that that you may be, as a rich hospital CEO, that you're connected to the establishment and those other things. How does that work in the political world, coming from a hospital, trying to run for political office?
Yeah, I have no idea where that information comes from. I'm humbled, but I'm a self-made person. My dad was a police officer, had a great upbringing, but I was the first person from my family to go to college. Everything that I've done, I basically earned my whole life. I put myself through college, through medical school. Now, my wife will argue. She was a nurse, and she helped quite a bit with that as well. I got to give her credit. But basically, I'm a self-made person, and I've had some success. I've never been the CEO of a hospital, never made millions of dollars, but we've enjoyed some success. I'm not any part of the establishment. I don't even know who the establishment they refer to is. My connections in Washington are minimal. I know our local senators, of course, and some of the other congressmen from Kansas, but I'm no part of the establishment. I'm not the 20-year professional politician.
One thing I want to find out about, we're going to take a break here, Dr. Marshall, and come back and talk about your family a little bit.
Great.
And you talk about growing up on a farm, what that means, but about your family and how they're supporting you in this process. Our guest is Dr. Roger Marshall, running for public office here, running for the 1st District Congressman position on the next election coming up here. We'll be back with more with him after this.
It's a beautiful day in our super high-speed internet great customer service neighborhood. Like you, this is where we live. In fact, our company is employee-owned, so it's our goal to improve the quality of life for everyone in our community by delivering faster, more reliable internet, clearer, more feature-laden phone service, quality TV channels, all with the level of customer service you'd expect from people who are your neighbors. Eagle Communications, our community connected.
Welcome back to the second half of our Forum program here on Eagle Community Television. The Forum is brought to you by Hayes Med. If you have any ideas, questions, thoughts for future programs, I'd like to hear from you. Send your note to gary.shorman@eaglecom.net, or you can find us on Facebook under ECTV Forum. Dr. Roger Marshall is our guest. He's running for the position of 1st District Congressman, representing those of us in Ellis County and throughout western and almost eastern Kansas, because 1st District is a big district.
Goes all the way to Emporia now.
And so you get to cover a lot of territory there. We went into the break talking about you and your family. Tell us a little bit about your family, and then you mentioned growing up on a farm and all that, and your extended family.
You bet. Thanks, Gary. So my wife, Lena, we met 33 years ago. She was a community college student there in El Dorado when we met, and I had just graduated from K-State. She was in her second year of nursing degree. I met her, I think, 6 months later. We were married approximately, and I asked her to marry me about 90 days after I met her. Was just fortunate enough to marry the most beautiful girl I'd ever met in my life, and she's still that person. She's given me 4 wonderful children, a daughter, Lauren, who lives in Silicon Valley now. Her husband has a great job working with Facebook, and they have the grandson, Roger Jr. He goes by his initials ROW, so I'm very honored they've named that child after me. She has her own blog, which we're very proud of, and then I've had three boys, and a lot of people from this area have probably seen them. We've been up here competing in football games and track meets and baseball games now for, goodness gracious, 25 years or so. The oldest son, a KU graduate, went on and got a graduate degree in Phoenix from Thunderbird University, an MBA. I got a son that's a junior at K-State now and a junior still at Great Bend High School.
So you kind of cover all the school bases that way with that.
Absolutely. There's plenty of room for everybody.
And is your family farm still around?
It is. So I was raised in El Dorado, and both family farms are still alive and well, and they were little farms by today's standard. Each were 160 acres, a very diverse crop of mostly wheat, some alfalfa, and a little herd of cattle.
Sounds like the Shorman family farm up south of Clay Center. You know, still there, but you can't farm with 160 acres in today's world.
Yeah, not anymore.
Time. You're a doctor, you deliver babies. What happens if you're in Washington, D.C. and you have to deliver a baby? How's that all going to work together in your world?
Right. I have 2 wonderful partners, and they've known about this for at least a year and a half, and they've agreed to be on call every other day until we figure out this election. And I would assume that if we go to Washington, D.C., that they'll hire a 3rd person and I'll go on sabbatical. And we'll see how long that sabbatical is. So it's all about people. And in this rural America, it is always about the physicians, the pharmacists, the people.
Talk about the time frame of what's next for you, because I know you're making around to all the counties, as many people as you can see and be a part of and get to know. Because again, running against an incumbent requires a different level of energy to go and make happen. So what are your next steps?
Right. So we're in the office on Mondays and Fridays, and I'm pretty much on the campaign trail Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Seems like lots of things coming up on Friday nights, and there's always a parade on Saturday. So our goal is just to get in front of many people as we can. And August 2nd is the election day. August 2nd is the Republican primary, and encourage everybody to get out and vote for it.
When you look ahead, like everybody thinks about November, but the Republican primary is the August 2nd date, which everyone is shooting for. And that's what, in this particular case, that's when the election will be determined for you and existing Congressman Tim Huelskamp. When you look at doing that, and you look at kind of that, I'll say a sprint to the finish, but are there going to be any key issues that you see you're going to be talking about that are going to really set the difference between you and your opponent?
Well, I hope that he will debate us. I hope that he will get in front of other people beside me so we can discuss the differences between us. And there are some pretty stark differences. He has no ability to get back on the House Ag Committee, and that'll be our biggest goal. From a national security standpoint, he has consistently voted against all funding for any type of national security, including a recent 2% pay raise for the troops. So he says he's in favor of national security, but his actions are different than that. Versus I think the national security issue is the #1 role of Congress. From an economy standpoint, more than just being a person that says we need to have decreased regulations, I'm going to be able to share some fresh ideas on how to make business grow in this state. And then lastly is healthcare. I hope I can demonstrate that I'm a person with solutions for healthcare versus he's a person that points out that there's something wrong but doesn't know how to solve the problems. So I hope we can stand beside each other and discuss these issues and let all the voters know the differences between us.
When you go out and you see people, you can talk about those differences as one part. But how can you make something happen? Because it seems like sometimes Washington may be a dark hole where change is in the works. You see it on the national front, whether it be on the Republican side or the Democratic side. Some of the new candidates, the outsiders, so to speak, are those that are really kind of connecting with the voters. How can you make a difference?
I think my whole life has been about developing my leadership skills. And I think that's the biggest problem in Washington is there are no leaders. If you're a professional politician, you never developed your leadership skills. You've never sat on a church board where you had to get along with each other. You've never sat on a community board trying to build some new ball fields like you have out here, where you have to work together to solve those problems. So traditionally, whatever I've done in my life, I've risen to some type of leadership position. And if you think about the history of the Big First, we've had great leaders from here, whether it was Senator Dole or Congressman Moran, who's now a senator. So we've had people that have risen to leadership positions, and right now we're missing that.
When you take a look at where we started, you started the conversation with your grandson. What is your view? What is your belief? What is your hope for the future of Kansas?
I think #1 is how do we preserve this rural way of life that you and I were brought up in. So my vision of Kansas is preserving this and making it better. I think things either get better or they get worse. So we have to figure out ways to keep our economies growing. We have to figure out ways to help cities survive that aren't located on an interstate. I see a vision of better health care out here. I see stronger economies. I see our schools continue to be some of the top schools in the country, and that's going to be the long-term solution to what makes Kansas great is the super schools that we have.
Dr. Marshall, how can somebody find out there? They may be watching today going, boy, I would like to find out more about this doctor from Great Bend's running, because I may want to vote for him. Where do they find out more information about you?
They can go to kansasformarshall.com. So if they just Google Roger Marshall, I bet they'll find it. But if they go to www.kansasformarshall.com, they can find us on Facebook, Dr. Roger W. Marshall.
Dr. Marshall, thanks for being on our program today. Hope you out there watching. It's a big election coming up. August the 2nd is the date of the election, but hope you educate yourself on the candidate that you want, the candidate you feel will best represent the state of Kansas and you and your community. Thanks for watching The Forum. It's brought to you by Hayes Med and by Eagle Communication, our community connected.
Hayes Med is your first and best choice for healthcare. They're the only facility providing tertiary level services in this region. With more than 70 physicians and 26 specialties ranging from heart, orthopedic, spine care, cancer, obstetrics and gynecology, wound care, rehabilitation and surgery, including the Da Vinci robotic surgery, Hayes Med is your comprehensive health provider for people throughout Western Kansas. Hayes Med, helping people be healthy.